All right, can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me? Yes. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Thank you. I know it's the end of the day. You're kind of feeling like, oh my God, it's like, I want to get off home. But you've got me at the end, so you're going to have to deal with it. I don't have a long time, and I don't have a kind of much to kind of go through, but I kind of want to go straight to the point. I feel some of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about is quite complex and difficult to fit into just under an hour, but I'll try my best, so put your seatbelts on, and I'll take you guys for a kind of quick ride. I think I'll just kind of say that you might have probably noticed I was kind of in and out of the room today and constantly on my phone, is because there was another murder that took place in the Midlands in Birmingham, where I come from, and although that I'm kind of an academic and an individual that is very interested and passionate about working with young people and studying young people, I'm also very invested in my community and very passionate about working with young people and saving and preserving the lives of those young people. And unfortunately, we're in a state of affairs that I'm sure in London, most of the news kind of is London focused, that there's a lot of stuff taking place in London, but it's not just London. You know, every major city and areas outside and regions outside of those major cities, the issue of crime, youth crime, violence, county lines is getting out of hand. And part of the things that I kind of look at, trying to explore and make sense as a criminologist to seek to understand, well, what is actually going on with our young people in our societies? Is this new? And the conversations that we're having right now is not new. It's not a new phenomenon. I'm studying gangs in the early 1800s. And guess what? The drivers that caused those young people to become criminals and join gangs is the exact same thing that we're talking about today. The only new variable or new indicator that I would say is different is social media, which we're talking about now, the fast growing of technology in the way in which we communicate with each other through a globalized space. That's the only difference. Are our young people becoming more violent? Are they getting younger? Children as young as 7 and 8 in the 1800s were getting sent to prison for some of the type of violence that we've been talking about right now. So it's not new. However, what was done then that we should be considering and talking about now, which may reduce some of that violence, which I'll be talking about in my PowerPoint presentation. So I think it's always important that when we try to understand or make sense of young people in today's society, is do we even understand where young people are at? Do we even understand the slang, the terminologies that young people use? I go to schools, colleges, institutions, youth centers, speak to parents every single week, and I ask them basic things. Can you tell me 4 of the top national stations, music channels that young people subscribe to? Then I start getting a bit wide. Can you tell me 3 slang words that young people use that are contemporary, that are recognized in London, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool? That I start getting wide. Because I work with a lot of passionate people that want to reduce issues around adverse childhood experiences, want to engage with young people that might be going through aspects of trauma. But do we understand young people? Do we even understand the reality of young people in 2019? So these are the things that I often hear when I go from different places and speak to young people in different spaces. They talk about this idea about them feeling trapped. They talk about this idea about the wanting, and they just want to belong to someone or a particular group. For some young people, unfortunately, violence is fun. Some young people are just bored. Many of our young people are involved in criminality due to families, intergenerational. Most of our young people lack purpose. Most young people just want to make money right now. Education's long. Most of our young people have unsettled beef. For a lot of our young people, unfortunately, it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because many of us as educators have told young people over and over and over and over and over again that they were going to become statistics, they were going to become criminals, they were going to become all of the negative things that we hear about in society, and guess what? Many of them then go on to live that out. And I would love to see one of my teachers in one of the arenas. I do this all the time, and I'm just saying, I wish one of my teachers would be here of old, because I would name and shame them, because the things that they used to say to me and my peers when I was growing up, is very different to what I am right now. And unfortunately, a lot of my friends, a lot of my family members that lived and were around those particular environments and went to those same schools have gone on. Some of them are not here right now, and some of them are incarcerated in prison. It's because I had a very good family upbringing. I had strong men and women in my family that taught me I'm not going to be a statistic. So how you see me, I'm just kind of the same as how I am 24/7. I don't need to wear a suit. I don't need to act and kind of be someone that I'm not, because I'm here for this, and I'm here for this. And I believe that those types of things become really important when we try to understand our young people in society, because it brings me to this point, that many young people in our society are marginalized. They're alienated in our society through the things that we do, the things that we don't provide, and I say we meaning us as adults within our society. So unfortunately, young people live in a society that's socially disorganized. We don't have it together. When I say we, I'm talking about adults. I'm not talking about you personally, just before you start trying to attack me at the end. We as a society don't have it together. Education don't communicate with community. Community don't engage with local authority. Local authority, there's loads of issues around multi-agency working, hence why we look at social services, we look at the exclusion rate, and so on and so forth. Some young people, unfortunately, in an environment that is socially disorganized, many of them start to pick up traits and do probably minor crimes. Then they meet individuals, regardless if they're not necessarily a gang, but could be an extremist group, could be a group that's around selling drugs. Counterlines has become a new buzzword in our society. And I say there's two places that they go if they don't end up dead. They either end up in jail, where they're going to have to serve some time, or they're going to end up in a mental health institution. Then I say if they survive that, then guess what happens? They go right back to the start. So they come back into our communities, and guess what new label they've got? What is it? Criminal. Ex-offender, and guess what? We haven't changed. Have you ever heard anybody say that, these guys like prison? Why do these people love to go to jail? I don't think they like to go to jail. What I genuinely believe is that when they come out, this hasn't changed, and I say they have about 4 or 5 months to get it together. If they don't get it together, meaning they don't have a strong, supportive family, they don't have the access to get a job, to get back into education, 4 or 5 months, and guess what they're going to do? The boys are going to say, still trying to get that job. I've got an opportunity for you, and so on and so forth. And then what then happens is, it becomes a cycle. They then start to become institutionalized, because everything that they want to do in terms of their ambitions, their thoughts, their talents, their wants, unfortunately is not recognized in environments that don't accept them. And I think we as a community and as a society need to be real with ourselves and have real conversations, because we're not really forgiving of criminals. We like to make society believe that we are. But just think about your local community and you found out that someone was a thief. We say it in our conversations in our community, oh, do you know about that, Lord? Do you remember them? Them thieves. Do you remember when they robbed such and such? I wouldn't want them working in my house. These are things that we say in the society. So unfortunately, this is what I genuinely believe is happening with our young people. So, this makes perfect sense. When we all talk about why do young people join gangs, why do they join subgroups, why do they join any form of group? Why? Because gangs are kind of like families. They make perfect sense. So I'm a bit radical when we talk about gangs, because I don't really like to talk about gangs as much, because we all talk about wanting to stop kids from joining gangs. But if I was to tell you, you have to leave your family tonight, you're going to look at me and tell me that I'm mad. Because how easy it for you to just leave your loved ones, the people you care for, the people that love you, the people that look up to you, just overnight. So I said, you know what? A best way to understand this is something that's been thrown down our throat for anybody that's worked with young people or worked with people or the human experience. Who remembers Maslow's hierarchy of needs? So you all remember it. So I don't need to give you the kind of breakdown of what it means. But we all know that Maslow's ultimately said that there's 5 stages that every human being needs. 4 that's going to essentially reach to the last one. So I look at this in the context of family. And this is what I've realized. So we talk about the basic needs that every human being needs. And let's just talk about young people specifically. If we as a society fail to give young people basic things such as eating, food, shelter, warmth, guess what gangs can do? So if you want to understand why kids want to get involved in things like county lines, unfortunately, you can just look right here. This is what I think is happening within our society, and more so London, because London has become the dominated discussion around the issue of knife crime safety. If we as a society fail to keep our children safe, guess what gangs can do? Keep them safe. Why wouldn't you join a gang? I'll be the first one to say in this room, I would join any gang if they could protect me despite what my teachers, my mentors, and my parents say. Why? Because if you're not going to walk with me to school every single day, if you're not going to walk with me from school every single day, then no matter what you say to me in the building, when I go home, I'm on my own. Because the new government report that got released last year, what did it say? The likelihood for a child to get stabbed is what? 3:15 and what? 5:30. So what happens if mum clocks out at 7 and don't get home till 7:30? What does that mean? You're supposed to just figure it out and hope that it doesn't happen to you. So go into the mind of a young person, that survival and a survival mechanism ultimately kicks in. And then we can just go on. The concept of love and belonging. Why wouldn't they join? If they don't feel love from outsiders, then of course they're going to join groups, regardless if they're negative or not, and so on and so forth. So they sign up. Think about it. Think about what you would do. If I said to you right now that there's 2 guys waiting for you right outside the hotel that's going to knock you out when you come outside of that hotel, and then 6 of the guys in the room say, don't worry, we'll walk with you outside, what are you going to do? You're going to walk with the 6 guys, aren't you? So why do we think that this is some kind of magical, kind of hard scientific experiment to understand that our young people might be petrified in the environments that they hear about violence, they sometimes see violence, they hear about it in the news, the media. We as parents get so scared, we don't want to send them outside. So we make them fearful of violence and give them a perception of violence that might not necessarily be there. And when you ask young people why they carry knives, why they engage in gang activity, they talk about oftentimes their safety. So maybe we need to focus on that. But I think this has become a new problem, is that gangs and violence, unfortunately, now has become like a forest fire. Because it's no longer just the white and black kids on the estate. It's no longer just the black lads on the flats. It's now happening in communities where violence historically maybe wasn't necessarily there. And I think it's important to talk about the concept of race and class. Because when we talk about violence in this particular country, violence is racialized. So when we hear about knife crime, the narrative generally is individuals that might look like me. And we often believe those particular concepts when statistically white males in this country stab more than black males. Same with terrorism. They would like us to believe that the narrative is that Muslims and Islamic faith and individuals that are from those particular groups are the ones that commit the most acts of terrorism. Far-right extremists commit more acts of terrorism than those that ascribe to the Muslim faith. But we believe our perceptions. We believe what we hear in the media, and even us as educators in the room believe those perceptions. So what are we doing to engage this argument that this forest fire is affecting all communities? Because violence is impacting all communities. But the drivers remain the same. In every era, in every generation, the arguments, the drivers remain the same. Poverty, deprivation, the lack or poor education. Many speakers today spoke about the concept of adverse childhood experiences. High unemployment, lack of resources, poor housing conditions, perceived violence within those particular housing conditions, racism, trauma, fear, Reactive interventions, not proactive ones. Competency of staff. Do you even know your young people? Do you even know the young people that you're engaging that may come from an array of different experiences, ethnicities, so on and so forth? Limited police's presence within the community. Damaged relationships between the police and community. Poor leadership, dysfunctional families. And you all could add on to the list if we was to go around and ask you what do you think the drivers are that cause young people to engage in aspects of violence. County lines. It's become a new buzzword now, isn't it? We're all worried about county lines now. We're all worried about children being exploited. And again, young people have always been exploited, unfortunately. Robin Hood, Charles Dickens, Oliver Twist. Is that not county lines? Take away the terminology, but was the action still exactly the same? Of course it was. So we then start to understand why young people are going missing. The last 18 months, I'm sure, on Facebook, Instagram, you see these images of these young kids or parent or family saying, if you can find this individual because they've gone missing since such and such date, can somebody contact the authorities or contact a family member? Or the parent then goes on to do a small video and say, come home, you're not in trouble, we just want to know what's going on. These young people, unfortunately, are not being kidnapped. My argument and my analysis is that they're purposely going missing for a particular reason. They want to make money. But nowhere in our discussion when we talk about violence, criminality, do we talk about organized criminality. We don't talk about the groups that bring these things into our country. Very rarely do I hear the Italian, Turkish, Serbian, Albanian mafias ever get discussed in these conferences. But all we do is we focus on the kids that are in the flats. Because unfortunately, those kids that live on our estates, ladies and gentlemen, do not own tankers, do not own aeroplanes, and they do not own gun manufacturers that bring these things into our country. But unfortunately, it gets into their hands. So if we're going to talk about the concept of gangs, if it will be, then we also need to talk about organized criminality. Oftentimes are individuals in positions of power. Oftentimes are individuals that may be linked to politics, individuals that may be in positions that young people don't get access to. So when we're talking about violence, we need to also understand that there's also an organized element that's linked to the behaviors that exist within our communities. And I genuinely believe that this is what happens with young people, with the drivers that I just mentioned, that most of our young people just want to make money. They want to live a better life. They want to get out of the hood. They want to get out of their condition. So what happens? They look for new ways to make money. Whether that is an opportunity to go on the track, to jump in a car, and if you don't know what these terminologies mean at this particular point, I'm scared. If they want to jump in a car and go conch, I'm doing this on purpose now. If they want to go OT and they want to do certain things in order to make that money, they're going to look for new ways to do it. And then guess what happens? Just like with all criminal mindsets, an individual gives them an opportunity to make that money. But guess what happens in most scenarios with young people? They lose it. They either get robbed on the journey, they get arrested by the police, another group decides that they want to rob them, or an addict of some sort decides that they want to rob them, and then they lose that money, and then guess what happens? So they need to find new ways to make that money back. Then the door opens for more criminal activity, more vulnerability, because now individuals can exploit that even more. And then after the time, majority of our young people that are caught up in this cycle of violence, county lines and whatnot, oftentimes forget the reason why they wanted to make money in the first place. Because now they're just in debt. And most of these young people nowadays, all they're doing is paying off debt. But what they're doing is creating illusions for other young people to want to engage in this type of behavior. Why? Because when they got a few grand that they're supposed to give to their boss and they put that few grand on Instagram, it makes other kids believe that, you know what, you're making so much money, I want to do what you're doing. They put these images up of drugs and whatnot. Other kids then start feeling that, you know what, you're living a better life than me. Then as I say to my young people when I go to the youth center, let me look at a picture of your bedroom and let me see if it's as luxurious as the pictures that you're putting on Instagram. What's the big illusion? So when we're talking about educating our young people, it's about, well, what do these images mean? Why are you selling a dream if your reality is very different? But I understand it because our kids want to live a better life and they live in conditions where they can't see that. So we're talking about social media, and social media becomes really important. It's become a major discussion now. You've been looking at the headlines over the last month or so. What are they saying? That they want to now censor people from utilizing social media applications to engage in aspects of violence, videos that incite violence. So now there's been this big discussion since January 2018, more so, drill music. Show of hands who know what drill music is. That's a very good thing. Show of hands who don't know what drill music is. Be honest, come on, throw your hands up. Who doesn't know what drill music is? No, put your hands up, I want to see you. Okay? It's important that we understand where our young people are at. I always say, imagine you're a doctor, or imagine you're a patient and you want some services and assistance from a doctor, and you imagine a doctor just walks in and says, yo, yeah, man, I know what I'm doing. I think I'm going to do something on your arm. I'm not really totally sure about what your arm looks like, but your operation is in about 20 minutes. Imagine what you're going to think. Versus an individual that walks in and says, good afternoon, Mr. Pinkney, my name is such and such, and I'm going to perform this operation on your arm, such and such, and this is what I'm planning on doing. Who are you likely to feel more comfortable with? So I'll go back to my original statement that I see young people and I treat young people like a specialism because I'm passionate about young people. And if we're talking about preserving life, if we're talking about trying to make sure that our children have the best possible ways that they can make the best decisions for their futures, we have to understand them. So before we talk about what intervention works with young people, my thing is let's know what young people are first. What they like, what they don't like, the trends, fashion trends, music trends, slang, and all of the things that you can learn from home, from your nieces, nephews, grandchildren, next door neighbors, local members from the community, those that are of religious persuasion can get all of this information from young people. Unfortunately, and this is where I shoot myself in the foot, you don't have to come to a conference and hear that from me. You don't. And I speak to professionals all the time, and they want to go to more events and they want to do all of this stuff to learn about young people, and I say you can learn it from the comfort of your home. But the conversation right now is that this has become the new problem. This is the reason why our young people are killing and shooting each other today. Social media and music videos. So I was saying, okay, well, is it a moral panic or is it much more? And this is where it gets tricky. Because as a member of the community, I'm going to say, yes, it does. Because when a music video gets uploaded in my community, shootings happen. And if you don't know the difference between London and Birmingham, London is the knife crime capital and Birmingham is the gun crime capital. So the likelihood in Birmingham is that someone's going to blast you for saying the wrong thing as opposed to London where someone might stab you. So that's the community element to me. But the academic is saying, not sure because I have to choose my words carefully. Why? Because the police might use what I'm saying to further incarcerate the same young people that I'm trying to keep off the streets. So we have to be careful with what we say and how we say it. I'm not here to criminalize young people. What I want young people to do is see their true potential, even if they find talents within music. However, some of the music that our young people subscribe to is self-destructive. It's self-destructive. Because when you analyze what is being said in the context of the narrative that they're talking about murder and the slaughter of young people from their own communities. That's why it's self-destructive. And yes, they engage in it because why? They talk about this idea of making it out, and they talk about this idea of wanting to get a better situation or opportunity for them and their families, and I totally get it. But the violence is often amplified on these social media platforms, like your Instagram, your YouTube, your Snapchat, your Twitter, and so on and so forth. Because I study the comments. And the comments are the ones that oftentimes perpetuate the violence even further. And many of us are old school, so you'll get it this way. Imagine when you was at school. In Birmingham, we call it blazing. I'm not sure what you call it in London, if anybody's from different cities. But blazing or dissing, it's kind of like we'll blaze. You say, yo, your hair's blonde. And you say, but your hair's black. And you're this, you're that. You're white, I'm black, so on and so forth. Everyone starts laughing until you come with that killer blow. And then what does everybody go? Ooh! Anybody remember that? Anybody been a victim of that? I have, on the school bus. Does anybody remember that feeling? That feeling's like you want to kill someone, right? When everyone's laughing and you ain't got a joke to come back with. Imagine that on a social media platform. That's intensified by thousands. By thousands. So even in the break time, a young person sent me a music video from my city, and I already know by the end of tonight something's going to happen. Because the comments, and all I was doing was reading the comments. And it's oftentimes impressionable young people, not gang members. Oftentimes it's our young people that like this type of music also, that also subscribe to the violence. Because then we kind of become like online spectators, because we want something to happen, like unfortunately like gladiators. And the violence that is perpetuated by the audience is amplified by them. Because just like bullies, if you don't have an audience, you got nobody to play up to. And on social media platforms, unfortunately, this is what we're now starting to see with our young people. But I argue that as relation to these things, we have to look at it because it has become personal. The stuff has become personal to the point where young people now feel that they have to murder each other based on what has been said. Young people shooting after each other in broad daylight. I'll say that again. Young people shooting after each other in broad daylight. Something that started as minute, ended up on a social media platform, amplified through the audience and people that are watching. So people then feel that they also have to play up to the audience through social media platform, and that's why an individual is recording whilst his friend's doing the shooting. So it's problematic, it's a cause of concern. It's because how do we do this? How do we engage with this effectively? Is it about censoring young people? Is it about stopping them from using social media platforms? Or is it something else? But why don't we talk about this? Why don't we talk about how young people have become so addicted to social media platforms that now they're even documenting murder and trauma and violence? Because I argue in my research that social media is creating narcissists. It's creating our young people to become more and more violent. But I also argue that these young people had a nihilistic mindset before they even went on a social media platform. So my equation is that it starts with nihilism. That the conditions that young people live in, the stresses that young people have to live with in their environment causes stress. So they become nihilistic. And then they say things like, I'd rather get caught with it than get caught without it. I'd rather get caught with a knife or with a gun than without it. So I don't care if I go to jail for it. There's even songs now that are out talking about they don't want to die young because they'd rather get caught with a gun than get buried by their peers. So with that nihilistic mindset, then when they go to social media platforms, that then creates a narcissistic type of behavior because now it's all about me. Watch what I'm doing. Watch the type of violence that I now engage with. And anybody that understands the concept of their narcissism is that when that's challenged or people critique it, then I believe then the violence then enters into the physical world. So from the media space to the physical world, my argument in terms of my analysis is that that's where it is. But let's introduce a new discussion, which is something else that I never hear, oftentimes within conferences. What about the multinational corporations that profit and benefit from the bloodshed of our young people in our communities? Why don't we ever talk about Tim Westwood, BBC One Extra? Why don't we ever talk about Charlie Sloth, Capital FM, and all of these other industries, Nike, Puma, Adidas, that profit off our young people? Who remembers last year? London, you guys. Who remember seeing that images? Or that image in specific? So if you don't know, August last year, Nike thought it was a brilliant idea to put this ad out right in the centre of London in August at the heart and the spike of knife crime. Now let's be real as educators. Where are young people in inner city London going skiing in August? No. So when our young people paid $49.99 for that and were involved in criminal activity, whether they died or whether they got locked up for doing something stupid, guess what happened to Nike? They profited. But we don't talk about the role of these organizations and how they profit off our bloodshed. Because I don't remember Charlie Slough or Tim Westwood being brought up when kids left their platforms and got murdered in the streets of London. Didn't hear it in the newspapers. I didn't hear BBC One Extra saying, let's help towards a family, a funeral, let's help a youth program in relation to where the violence is essentially taking place. So we can point the finger at our young people, but let's go back to the social disorganization and the society that we often live in. I think it's disgusting that these companies profit off our young people, and yet still we point the finger and blame young people for this nihilistic behavior when they live in a capitalist and consumerist society that tell them, as long as you're wearing these things, it's fine. I can guarantee if we were to do some research and find out what clothing were the young people wearing at the point of them dying, I can guarantee it was one of these. So there needs to be responsibility on all forms. It can't just be us as educators, because everyone likes to point the finger at us. It can't just be the government. It can't just be community. It can't just be parents, because billions here are being made, but this is also historical as well. Because unfortunately, when you look at things like gangster rap, before gangster rap, it was hip hop that spoke about politics, freedom, justice, and equality. Somebody, unfortunately, that may have looked like these two said, we will make more money if you talk about niggas killing bitches and hoes. And someone thought, brilliant, we'll make money from it. And the individuals that come from them impoverished communities then said, you know what, I want to get out the hood too, so I'll talk about it. Put me in a booth and I'll talk about madness and destruction, despite what might happen in my community. Are we not seeing this now in repeat when we're talking about drill music, grime, and all of these other things? As I said, gifted and talented young people that oftentimes these multinational corporations are exploiting the experiences and the environments in which these young people are going through. So a young person said to me the other day, and I think that this is something that we all should think about, Craig, what do you want me to do? Because I can't get a job, and you know I can't get a job. So I either sell these drugs or I make this music. It's a hard question. Because we would all say, you know what, but the drugs? No, because where I come from, as I said, the music is self-destructive. Because if young people are prepared to pick up guns and murder each other over what someone said on a song, to me that's more damaging than somebody selling drugs, from my perspective and vantage point. And this is where we are right now. So we need to talk about organized criminality. Where did the drugs come from? Where did the guns come from? We need to talk about these big bosses that get billions off the stuff that young people are subscribing to and signing up to, despite the things that they say might have an impact on their communities. So unfortunately, this new idea and conversation now I keep hearing on Question Time, I keep hearing on Panorama, and all of these new discussions now about just lock them up, more stop and search in London, and all of these things that we keep hearing about, unfortunately, don't fix the problem. Punitive measures alone do not fix the problem. So we need to think of new ways of engaging with young people. We need to think of new approaches, and that's why now, if you're not aware of these new conversations now about public health, we need a public health approach to respond to violence, because violence is a disease, it spreads like a disease, and we need to respond to it as such. So stop and search and locking people up doesn't remove that fear. It doesn't remove that feeling of, well, I'm scared to go to school or college, or I feel I need to carry a knife to protect myself because them boys that are standing on the corner or them girls that might be on that bus might attack me. Something needs to be done to address that. And we could have a conversation all day about what that essentially looks like. But unfortunately, you don't have me all day. But what it does mean is that we need to start having more critical conversations about those layers that young people are presenting, that young people have for show, that it's much deeper than what we see in terms of the surface. And it needs a holistic and a collective approach. It can't just be our role as educators to engage. It needs to be in conjunction with families. It needs to be in conjunction with community organizations. It needs to be in conjunction with religious institutions. And I'm not necessarily saying that people need to join religious groups, but what I am saying is that religious organizations have very big buildings. So we're talking about the dismantlement of youth services and youth provisions because there's no buildings. But in my local community, there's temples, there's mosques, there's churches, there's synagogues. And all they use those buildings for is death, ceremonies as to do with weddings, and services as it relates to prayer and spirituality. Brilliant. Charity. Thousands and thousands and thousands, millions come out of the country and go to Asia and go to Africa. Brilliant. But I see a lot of kids that stand on a cross from those institutions selling drugs. In them same places where all of those buildings are, young kids are stabbing and killing each other. So what about poverty of the mind? So maybe it's a conversation that we have in our local community about what religious institutions can do in offering their spaces. So myself, with a number of teachers in my local community, outside of work, support religious institutions to utilize their spaces to engage with young people. Because one of the things, unfortunately, ladies and gents, that this work, I call it heart work. It's not something that I just sign up for on a Monday morning and I clock out at 5. It's 24/7. My phone goes off 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning when I've got a parent needing help because their child is going off the rails. So unfortunately, it's 24/7 type of work. So it might mean that we need to engage with people outside of work, unfortunately, to help give us resources, help give us ideas, perspectives, models that we can engage young people in our buildings. That's effective practice. So if we go back historically, that's what won. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the reason why youth violence was reduced in the early 1800s was religious organizations realizing that free school, they realized that youth clubs, they realized that boxing and sporting academies, they realized that, you know what, developing discipline and morality of young people was going to reduce it. And guess what? It reduced. But now we're in a time when we don't need youth centers because the belief is that youth centers are only for playing table tennis. And if you think that youth centers are only for playing table tennis, you have never met a youth worker before. Really, you've never met a youth worker before. Because when I was a youth worker and I was managing a youth center, ping pong and table tennis was the last activity that we did. Because it was all about development, social development. It was all about emotional development. It was always about positive life choices before we were able to play the computer games and so on and so forth. And I think that's really important that when we engage with that. So I'll finish with this. I called it heart work for a reason, because there's not many out there that's doing this work. If we're talking about thousands and thousands of our young people across our country that are involved in systemic violence, then unfortunately there needs to be a systemic group of professionals, I call you guys superheroes, that are going to go out there and do the above and beyond, because it's only the above and beyond that's going to save the lives of our future generations. Thank you very much. So the first question that was asked to me was, what advice do you have for steering primary school children away from gang culture? As I said, I personally have an issue with the concept of gang, where them Christians gone. What I would more do, because unfortunately, unless you're going to remove those children outside of that environment, it's not really much that you can do to steer them away from that. And what I mean by that is, for example, where I was growing up, all of my next door neighbors were individuals that are involved in gangs. Now, when you're saying how you're going to steer a young person away from that, it's kind of almost impossible, because as they leave home every single day, quite naturally they're going to meet their next door neighbors, and it's going to be their friends, right? That oftentimes go to their same school, go to their same community centers. Their parents also know each other, and so on and so forth. So what I would kind of talk about more so is what activities can you support parents and local people to be distracted? Because I would say that's what happened with me. My mum and dad made sure I was distracted, and majority of that time it wasn't paid stuff. So it's not a discussion about not having the money to do stuff, but every city council, most leisure centres do free swimming, free bike riding, and these initiatives that are taking place across the country, but oftentimes we just don't know about it. So because we don't know about it, we have a perception that nothing's going on. And there's loads of reports that talk about loads that's going on, but maybe it's the marketing of these campaigns that are not there. Even with my own children, they go swimming, they go football, they go activities that are in local parks, and they're all free from the local councils. So steering them away for me is linked to also what they're doing in their social time. Because unfortunately, and I have to always be real with people, that telling people to walk out of their houses and do that is almost impossible, because they're going to meet and see these people every single day. So I hope that answers your question. I'm more than happy to have a conversation about that. Craig needs to be on BBC Question Time. Yes and no. I get frustrated when I watch these things, because you only have a certain amount of time to answer a question. Nothing's just yes and no when you're talking about complex issues. How do you measure the impact on your work as on young people? It's very hard to measure my impact based on the current metrics of when we're talking about particular outcomes. So measuring my impact, I'll give you a short and quick story. A young man that I work with, he robs a lot of young people in my local community. He's well known, is quite feared in our local community. So I challenged him one time about robbing a young man who he believed to have a Rolex. And about a week later, he phoned me and said, "Craig, I feel really bad." I said, "Why?" He goes, I just robbed someone, but I don't know why, but I feel really bad. And I told him, excellent. And why I told him excellent is because I'm not going to be able to stop you from robbing people today, but I've made you think today. So the next time that you're out there in the community doing something, then it might make you think about the consequences of your particular actions. Now, that might be hard for people to swallow, but we're dealing with human beings, and human beings don't change like that. So you have to work with people. Unfortunately, I measure my work based on what parents tell me, based on what young people tell me, based on what I see within my community. If the shootings stop, then it means that there's a reduction in shootings in my local community. Now, according to a police metrics, it might not be recognized as violence, but I know in my community, and I'm sure in your communities, who's involved in the actual violence. And if that stops from something very small, then I say that's impact. But again, that's a debate that we look at when we're talking about outcomes. What age should gang culture be taught in primary school? I think, again, I'm going to keep saying this. Let's move away from this conversation of gang culture. The reason why I keep saying this is because majority of the murders that take place in our country are not all gang related. What I believe is that our young people are becoming more and more violent. And the moment you talk about gangs, as I mentioned earlier, it's one, it's racialized. And two, when we talk about gangs, we're only talking about a small population of each community that ascribe to knife or gun crime. So when I go into schools, I talk about violence to all young people as opposed to focusing on gang culture, because a lot of young people, as I said, that carry knives are not necessarily in gangs or ascribing to gangs. And again, for those that might want a little bit of conversation more about that, I'm more than happy to do that. Faith buildings are underused spaces, so our schools, I think that's it. Yep, that's cool. Mm-hmm.
So, round of applause for Craig. Thank you so much. Yeah. Hold on, I'll move that clicker.